Section 15 of the Good Dog Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bree Bayaki. Adrift on an Ice Pan by Wilfred Thomason Grenfell. Part 2. My occupation, till what seemed like midnight, was unraveling rope, and with this I padded out my knickers aside, and my shirt as well, though it was a clumsy job, for I could not see what I was doing. Now, getting my largest dog, Doc, as big as a wolf and weighing 92 pounds, I made him lie down, so that I could cuddle around him. I then wrapped the 3 skins around me, arranging them so that I could lie on one edge, while the other came just over my shoulders and head. My own breath collecting inside the newly flayed skin must have had a soporific effect, for I was soon fast asleep. One hand I had kept warm against the curled-up dog, but the other, being gloveless, had frozen, and suddenly I woke, shivering enough, I thought, to break my fragile pan. What I took at first to be the sun was just rising, but I soon found out it was the moon, and then I knew it was about 12:30. The dog was having an excellent time. He hadn't been cuddled so warm all winter, and he resented my moving, with low growls, till he found it wasn't another dog. The wind was steadily driving me now toward the open sea, and I could expect, short of a miracle, nothing but death out there. Somehow, one scarcely felt justified in praying for a miracle. But we have learned down here to pray for the things we want, and, anyhow, just at that moment, the miracle occurred. The wind fell off suddenly, and came with a light air from the southward, and then dropped stark calm. The ice was now all abroad, which I was sorry for there was a big safe pan not 20 yards away from me. If I could have got on that, I might have killed my other dogs when the time came, and with their coats I could hope to hold out for 2 or 3 days more, and with the food and drink their bodies would offer me, need not at least die of hunger or thirst. To tell the truth, they were so big and strong I was half afraid to tackle them with only a sheath knife on my small and unstable raft. But it was now freezing hard. I knew the calm water between us would form into cakes, and I had to recognize that the chance of getting near enough to escape onto it was gone. If, on the other hand, the whole bay froze again, I had yet another possible chance. For my pan would hold together longer, and I should be opposite another village, called Goose Cove, at daylight, and might possibly be seen from there. I knew that the Comatics there would be staring at daybreak over the hills for a parade of Orangemen about 20 miles away. Possibly, therefore, I might be seen as they climbed the hills. So I lay down and went to sleep again. It seems impossible to say how long one sleeps, but I woke with a sudden thought in my mind that must have been a flag. But again I had no pole and no flag. However, I set to work in the dark to disarticulate the legs of my dead dogs, which were now frozen stiff, and which were all that offered a chance of carrying anything like a distress signal. Cold as it was, I determined to sacrifice my shirt for that purpose, with the first streak of daylight. It took a long time in the dark to get the legs off, and when I had patiently marled them together with old harness ropes and the remains of the skin traces, it was the heaviest and crookedest flagpole it has ever been my lot to see. I had had no food from 6 o'clock the morning before, when I had eaten porridge and bread and butter. I had, however, a rubber band which I had been wearing instead of one of my garters, and I chewed on that for 24 hours. It saved me from thirst and hunger, oddly enough. It was not possible to get a drink from my pan, for it was far too salty, but anyhow that thought did not distress me much, for as from time to time I heard the cracking and grinding of the newly formed slob, it seemed that my devoted boat must inevitably soon go to pieces. At last the sun rose, and the time came for the sacrifice of my shirt. So I stripped, and, much to my surprise, found it not half so cold as I had anticipated. I now reformed my dogskins with the raw side out, so that they made a kind of coat quite rivaling Joseph's. But with the rising of the sun, the frost came out of the joints of my dog's legs, and the friction caused by waving it made my flagpole almost tie itself in knots. Still, I could raise it 3 or 4 feet above my head, which was very important. Now, however, I found that instead of being as far out to sea as I had reckoned, I had drifted back in a northwesterly direction and was off some cliffs known as Ireland Head. Near these, there was a little village looking seaward, whence I should certainly have been seen. But, as I had myself earlier in the winter been night-bound at this place, I had learnt that there was not a single soul living there at all this winter. The people had all, as usual, migrated to the winter houses up the bay, where they get together for schooling and social purposes. I soon found it was impossible to keep waving so heavy a flag all the time, and yet I dared not sit down, for that might be the exact moment someone would be in the position to see me from the hills. The only thing in my mind was how long I could stand up and how long go on waving that pole at the cliffs. Once or twice I thought I saw men against their snowy faces, which, I judged, were about 5.5 miles from me, but they were only trees. Once, also, I thought I saw a boat approaching. A glittering object kept appearing and disappearing on the water, but it was only a small piece of ice sparkling in the sun as it rose on the surface. I think that the rocking of my cradle up and down on the waves had helped me to sleep, for I felt as well as ever I did in my life, and with the hope of a long sunny day, I felt sure I was good to last another 24 hours, if my boat would hold out and not rot under the sun's rays. Each time I sat down to rest, my big dog, Doc, came and kissed my face and then walked to the edge of the ice pan, returning again to where I was huddled up, as if to say, "Why don't you come along? Surely it is time to start." The other dogs were also now moving about very restlessly, occasionally trying to satisfy their hunger by gnawing at the dead bodies of their brothers. I determined at midday to kill a big Eskimo dog and drink his blood. As I had read only a few days before in the farthest north of Dr. Nansen's doing, that is, if I survived the battle with him, I could not help feeling, even then, my ludicrous position, and I thought, if ever I got ashore again, I should have to laugh at myself, standing hour after hour waving my shirt at those lofty cliffs, which seemed to assume a kind of sardonic grin, so that I could almost imagine they were laughing at me. At times I could not help of thinking of the good breakfast that my colleagues were enjoying at the back of those same cliffs, and of the snug fire and the comfortable room which we call our study. I can honestly say that from first to last, not a single sensation of fear entered my mind, even when I was struggling in the slob ice. Somehow it did not seem unnatural. I had been through the ice 6 times before. For the most part I felt very sleepy, and the idea was then very strong in my mind that I should soon reach the solution of the mysteries that I had been preaching about for so many years. Only the previous night, Easter Sunday, at prayers in the cottage, we had been discussing the fact that the soul was entirely separate from the body, that Christ's idea of the body as the temple in which the soul dwells is so amply borne out by modern science. We had talked of thoughts from that admirable book, Brain and Personality, by Dr. Thompson of New York, and also of the same subject in the light of a recent operation performed at the Johns Hopkins Hospital by Dr. Harvey Cushing. The doctor had removed from a man's brain 2 large cystic tumors without giving the man an anesthetic, and the patient had kept up a running conversation with him all the while the doctor's fingers were working in his brain. It had seemed such a striking proof that ourselves and our bodies are 2 absolutely different things. Our eternal life has always been with me a matter of faith. It seems to me one of those problems that must always be a mystery to knowledge. But my own faith in this matter had been so untroubled. It seemed now almost natural to be leaving through this portal of death from an ice pan. In many ways, also, I could see how a death of this kind might be of value to the particular work that I am engaging in. Except for my friends, I had nothing I could think of to regret whatever. Certainly I should like to have told them the story, but then one does not carry folios of paper in running shorts which have no pockets, and all my writing gear had gone by the board with the komatik. I could still see a testimonial to myself some distance away in my khaki overalls, which I had left on another pan in the struggle of the night before. They seemed a kind of company, and would possibly be picked up and suggest the true story. Running through my head all the time, quite unbidden, were the words of the old hymn. My God, my Father, while I stray far from home on life's dark way, oh, teach me from my heart to say, Thy will be done. It is a hymn we hardly sing out here, and it was an unconscious memory of my boyhood days. It was a perfect morning, a cobalt sky, an ultramarine sea, a golden sun, an almost wasteful extravagance of crimson over hills of purest snow, which caught a reflected glow from rock and crag. Between me and the hills lay miles of rough ice and long veins of thin black slob that had formed during the night. For the foreground, there was my poor, gruesome pan, bobbing up and down on the edge of the open sea, stained with blood and littered with carcasses and debris. It was smaller than last night, and I noticed also that the new ice from the water melted under the dogs' bodies had been formed at the expense of its thickness. 5 dogs, myself in colored football costume, and a bloody dogskin cloak, with a gay flannel shirt on a pole of frozen dog's legs, completed the picture. The sun was almost hot by now, and I was conscious of a surplus of heat in my skin coat. I began to look longingly at one of my remaining dogs, for an appetite will rise even on an ice pan, and that made me think of fire. So once again, I inspected my matches. Alas, the heads were in paste, all but 3 or 4 blue-top wax ones. These I now laid out to dry, while I searched about on my snowpan to see if I could get a piece of transparent ice to make a burning glass, for I was pretty sure that with all the unraveling tow I had stuffed into my leggings, and with the fat of my dogs, I could make smoke enough to be seen, if only I could get a light. I had found a piece of which I thought would do, and had gone back to wave my flag, which I did every 2 minutes, when I suddenly thought I saw again the glitter of an oar. It did not seem possible, however, for it must be remembered it was not water which lay between me and the land, but slob ice, which a mile or 2 inside me was very heavy. Even if people had seen me, I did not think they could get through, though I knew that the whole shore would then be trying. Moreover, there was no smoke rising on the land to give me hope that I had been seen. There had been no gun flashes in the night, and I felt sure that, had anyone seen me, there would have been a bonfire on every hill to encourage me to keep going. So I gave it up, and went on with my work. But the next time I went back to my flag, the glitter seemed very distinct, and though it kept disappearing as it rose and fell on the surface, I kept my eyes strained upon it, for my dark spectacles had been lost, and I was partly snowblind. I waved my flag as high as I could raise it, broadside on. At last, beside the glint of white oar, I made out the black streak of the hull. I knew that, if the pan held on for another hour, I should be all right. With that strange perversity of the human intellect, the first thing I thought of was what trophies I could carry with my luggage from the pan, and I pictured the dog-bone flagstaff adorning my study. The dogs actually ate it afterwards. I thought of preserving my ragged puttees with our collection of curiosities. I lost no time now at the burning glass. My whole mind was devoted to making sure I should be seen, and I moved about as much as I dared on the raft, waving my sorry token aloft. At last there could be no doubt about it. The boat was getting nearer and nearer. I could see that my rescuers were frantically waving, and, when they came within shouting distance, I heard someone cry out, "Don't get excited! Keep on the pan where you are!" They were infinitely more excited than I. Already to me it seemed just as natural now to be saved as half an hour before it had seemed inevitable I should be lost. And had my rescuers only know, as I did, the sensation of a bath in that ice, when you could not dry yourself afterwards. They need not have expected me to follow the example of the Apostle Peter and throw myself into the water. As the man in the bow leaped from the boat onto my ice raft and grasped both my hands in his, not a word was uttered. I could see in his face the strong emotions he was trying hard to force back, though in spite of himself tears trickled down his cheeks. It was the same with each of the others of my rescuers, nor was there any reason to be ashamed of them. These were not the emblems of weak sentimentality, but the evidences of the realization of the deepest and noblest emotion of which the human heart is capable. The vision that God has use for us, his creatures. The sense of that supreme joy of the Christ. The joy of unselfish service. After the handshake and swallowing a cup of warm tea that had been thoughtfully packed in a bottle, we hoisted in my remaining dogs and started for home. To drive the boat home, there were not only 5 Newfoundland fishermen at the oars, but 5 men with Newfoundland muscles in their backs, and 5 as brave hearts as ever beat in the bodies of human beings. So, slowly but steadily, we forged through to the shore, now jumping out onto larger pans and forcing them apart with the oars, now hauling the boat out and dragging her over when the jam of ice packed tightly in by the rising wind was impossible to get through otherwise. My first question, when at last we found our tongues, was, "How ever did you happen to be out in the boat in this ice?" To my astonishment, they told me that the previous night 4 men had been away on a long headland, cutting out some dead harp seals that they had killed in the fall and left to freeze up in a rough wooden store they had built there, and that as they were leaving for home, my pan of ice had drifted out clear of Hare Island, and one of them, with his keen fisherman's eyes, had seen something unusual. They at once returned to their village, saying there was something alive drifting out to sea on the floe ice. But their report had been discredited, for the people thought that it could only be the top of some tree. All the time I had been driving along, I knew there was one man on that coast who had a good spyglass. He tells me he instantly got up in the midst of his supper on hearing the news, and hurried over the cliffs to the lookout, carrying his trusty spyglass with him. Immediately, dark as it was, he saw that without any doubt there was a man out on the ice. Indeed, he saw me wave my hands every now and again toward the shore. By a very easy process of reasoning, on so uninhabited a shore, he at once knew who it was, though some of the men argued that it must be someone else. Little had I thought, as night was closing in, that away on that snowy hilltop lay a man with a telescope, patiently searching those miles of ice for me. Hastily they rushed back to the village, and at once went down to try to launch a boat, but that proved to be impossible. Miles of ice lay between them and me. The heavy sea was hurling great blocks on the landwash, and night was already falling, the wind blowing hard on the shore. The whole village was aroused, and messengers were dispatched at once along the coast, and lookouts told off to all the favorable points, so that while I considered myself a laughingstock, bowing with my flag to those unresponsive cliffs, there were really many eyes watching me. One man told me that with his glass he distinctly saw me waving the shirt flag. There was little slumber that night in the villages, and even the men told me there were few dry eyes, as they thought of the impossibility of saving me from perishing. We are not given to weeping over much on this shore, but there are tears that do a man honor. Before daybreak, this fine volunteer crew had been got together. The boat, with such a force behind it of willpower, would, I believe, have gone through anything. And after seeing the heavy breakers through which we were guided, loaded with their heavy ice-battering rams, when at last we ran through the harbor mouth with the boat on our return, I knew well what wives and children had been thinking of when they saw their loved ones put out. Only 2 years ago, I remember a fisherman's wife watching her husband and 3 sons take out a boat to bring in a stranger that was showing flags for a pilot, but the boat and its occupants have not come back. Every soul in the village was on the beach as we neared the shore. Every soul was waiting to shake hands when I landed, even with the grip that one after another gave me, some no longer trying to keep back the tears. I did not find out my hands were frostburnt. A fact I have not been slow to appreciate since, however. I must have been a weird sight as I stepped ashore, tied up in rags, stuffed out with oakum, wrapped in the bloody skins of dogs, with no hat, coat, or gloves besides, and only a pair of short knickers. It must have seemed to some as if it were the old man of the sea coming ashore. But no time was wasted before a pot of tea was exactly where I wanted it to be, and some hot stew was locating itself where I had intended an hour before the blood of one of my remaining dogs should have gone. Rigged out in the warm garments the fishermen wear, I started with a large team as hard as I could race for the hospital, for I had learnt that the news had gone over that I was lost. It was soon painfully impressed upon me that I could not much enjoy the ride, for I had to be hauled like a log up the hills, my feet being frostburnt so that I could not walk. Had I guessed this before going into the house, I might have avoided much trouble. It is time to bring this egotistic narrative to an end. Jack lies curled up by my feet while I write this short account. Bryn is once again leading and lording it over his fellows. Doc and the other survivors are not forgotten, now that we have again returned to the less romantic episodes of a mission hospital life. There stands in our hallway a bronze tablet to the memory of 3 noble dogs, Moody, Watch, and Spy, whose lives were given for mine on the ice. In my home in England, my brother has placed a duplicate tablet and has added these words: "Not one of them is forgotten before your Father which is in heaven." And this I most fully believe to be true. The boy whose life I was intent on saving was brought to the hospital a day or 2 later in a boat, the ice having cleared off the coast not to return for that season. He was operated on successfully and is even now on the high road to recovery. We all love life. I was glad to be back once more, with possibly a new lease of it before me. I had learned on the pan many things, but chiefly that the one cause for regret, when we look back on a life which we think is closed forever, will be the fact that we have wasted its opportunities. As I went to sleep that first night, there still rang in my ears the same verse of the old hymn which had been my companion on the ice. Thy will, not mine, O Lord. End of section 15. Recording by Bree Bayaki.